There was a recent event at Media Day that most people were totally unaware of. However, once you hear it, it cannot be unheard. Because Caitlin Clark's words were not loud. It wasn't overly dramatic. On the surface, it wasn't even controversial. However, it was evident. And if you paid close attention, it sounded like a message. Not to the admirers. Not to the press. Hello, everyone.
Guys, it's Sophie Cunningham here. You guys are with me during Media Day.
To her own team, nevertheless. In particular, Stephanie White. Here's what makes this so fascinating. As this was meant to be an ordinary day. Is Miles. PR responses. Good vibes. The kind of setting where no one speaks, not even in a mildly bad way. Nevertheless, Caitlin said something that completely altered the atmosphere in the midst of it all. When she was questioned about playing off the ball, it happened. A more straightforward query. A common subject. However, her response was not at all ordinary. Because she did agree. She did indeed maintain a professional demeanor. However, the portion that no one can ignore came next. She was pretty explicit about it. She is fully aware of who she is, what she excels in, and what happens when she isn't in control. And everything changes at that point. Because it's more than just confidence when a player speaks like that, especially at this early stage of their career. It's awareness, positioning, and a signal. It begins to feel as though something more significant is taking place when you link that to everything else going on behind the scenes, including how specific players are used and how the system is being developed. This felt more like a warning than an explanation. What comes next, if that is the case, may become extremely unpleasant. Zooming out is necessary to truly see why that moment struck differently. Because Media Day wasn't the beginning of this. This has been developing. Quietly, slowly, and now it's beginning to manifest. Because Caitlin Clark attracted attention in addition to talent when she joined the Indiana Fever. Enormous attention. Sales of tickets surged. The number of viewers increased. Suddenly, every game was more important. And that kind of effect, it modifies expectations. Because she is now the focal point rather than just another novice learning the system. That's what supporters anticipated, anyway. However, this is where things become more difficult. Because although Caitlin Clark was viewed by the outside world as the franchise's future, not everything in the system was designed with her in mind. In theory, that is also typical. Because you don't just give everything to one player in the WNBA. You construct structure. You create roles. You develop equilibrium. Here's the problem, though. Balance may begin to appear as a limitation when you have a player with that level of attacking skill. And that's precisely where the conflict starts. Because there has been a constant discussion about her game since the beginning. Should Caitlin Clark hold them in her hands the most of the time? Or should she spend more time off the ball? That seems like a strategic choice on paper. In actuality, though, the choice is one of power. Because the game is controlled by whoever has the ball. Stephanie White can help with that. Because everything revolves around her ideology, system, and idea of how this team ought to function. Caitlin will play both on and off the ball in that scenario, according to what we've heard over the past year. Again, that's not out of the ordinary. Great systems change, and great players adapt. However, this is what fans began to notice. The vocabulary used is different when discussing other players. Consider Kelsey Mitchell. When teammates and coaches talk about her, it's all about giving her the freedom to play her game and placing her in situations where she doesn't need to think. She just reacts. And that's a very effective strategy. Because it enhances rhythm, boosts confidence, and makes the most of a player's strengths. However, the tone alters when Caitlin Clark is brought up. These days, it's all about structure, system, modifications, and playing within the parameters. And that distinction, it was not overlooked. Fans began to question why one player was given freedom while the other was given structure. And when you consider Caitlin's real playing style, that question just becomes more pressing. Because inventiveness, speed, and vision are the foundation of her whole game. Command. When she's reading defenses, pushing tempo, making judgments in real time, and causing havoc, she performs at her best. And you take away a significant portion of that as soon as you remove the ball from her hands. To be fair, there is a rationale for this strategy. Because it's draining to bring the ball up every possession, handle full court pressure, and make every choice. Caitlin herself recognized this during media day. She didn't dispute it. She didn't retaliate violently. Her response becomes intriguing when she acknowledges that it's exhausting, that she occasionally needs relief, and that having another ball handler helps. Because it was a yes rather than an outright rejection, yet. And those are the most crucial kind of responses. Because although they appear to be cooperative, they are actually establishing limits. And she did just that. Because she made one thing very plain immediately after admitting that balance was necessary. She claimed to be the league's top transition player. Not among the greatest. Not the best, possibly. The best. In that assertion. Everything changes there. Because strategy is no longer the only factor in this. It has to do with identity. Because when a player describes their strengths in public, they are addressing the system as well as the media. This is where I thrive, they remark. You can't take this away from me. It begins to feel like more than simply a remark when you relate that to everything else going on within the squad. Because, let's not forget, this is a squad that is still figuring itself out, with new players joining, positions still being defined, chemistry still building, and decisions being made that could have long-term effects. Because Caitlin Clark is considering more than just this season, she is also considering her contract status, her future with the team, and what lies ahead. The stakes are raised by the possibility that this is the location where she can reach her full potential. Because if she feels constrained, that's a long-term decision point rather than just a temporary problem. And for that reason, this media day is extremely important. For the first time, it seemed as though she was transmitting a message rather than merely responding to inquiries. It was a deliberate, controlled, and unmistakable one. And when you add it to everything that fans have been observing, the variations in the way players are employed, the tiny changes in tone and the emphasis on specific jobs begin to create a larger image. One in which there may be tension beneath the superficial appearance of everything being good. Strategic tension is the kind that develops covertly until something pushes it into the light, not explosive tension or public drama. What she stated on Media Day was only the beginning if that's where this is going. At this point, everything ceases to feel like a straightforward Media Day response and begins to feel like a genuine issue that is simmering beneath the surface. Because once Caitlin Clark's video went viral, people began comparing it rather than just listening to what she had to say, contrasting it with everything else mentioned that same day. At that point, the tension became apparent. Because fans went back and listened to Stephanie White's remarks about other players immediately after Caitlin declared, "I'm the best transition player in the league." And the same name kept coming up. Mitchell. Kelsey. This is when things start to get interesting. Because the tone dramatically changes when Stephanie White talks about Kelsey. It has nothing to do with structure. The system is not the issue. It has nothing to do with changing her role. It has to do with freedom. Allowing her to play. Placing her in situations where she is not required to think. She simply does what she does best. Additionally, that type of language is important. Fans hear that because athletes sense it. It's difficult to overlook the difference when you contrast that with the way Caitlin is being discussed. For Caitlin, it's about adjusting your game, fitting into the system, and playing both on and off the ball. For Kelsey, it's, let her cook. Give her freedom. Focus on what she excels in. Again, this isn't about making drama out of thin air. Because narratives are driven by perception, this is about perception. And the story that is currently emerging is straightforward. It's possible that Caitlin Clark is receiving different treatment. And everything begins to be reinterpreted via that prism once that concept gains traction. Every possession, every rotation, every play. However, this is the point at which the battle truly intensifies. Because control is now more important than coaching philosophy. Because the offense's direction is determined by whoever controls Caitlin's style of play. And she doesn't currently have complete control over it. The first twist appears at that point. Because Caitlin handled it tactically rather than retaliating violently or making it a public issue. She gave a non-emotional response. It wasn't hostile. It was computed. She acknowledged the physical demands, expressed empathy, and supported the idea of playing off the ball. Then, though, she drew a pretty distinct line. She identified her areas of greatest value. Change. She has a ball in her hands. Increasing the pace. She did not explicitly question the system by doing that. Within it, she established a boundary. And that's a totally different kind of action. Because it's modest but effective. And that's what makes it risky from a competitive standpoint. Because today, if the system deviates too far from that, it appears to be mismanagement rather than merely strategy. That's pressure, too. There is pressure on the organization, the coaching staff, and the future decision-making process. However, this is where the second twist enters the picture. Because the dynamics of the roster are also changing as Caitlin is going through all of this. Because the Indiana Fever added new players rather than simply reassembling the old squad. Kelsey Mitchell, Nilissa Smith, and Sophie Cunningham are returning as key players. Every one of the players has a certain function and set of expectations. They play the game in a style that requires sharing touches. It is necessary to split responsibilities. And that's where the complexity arises. Because not all of your elite players can control the ball. Not everyone is able to play in their perfect manner all the time. And even if no one says it aloud, that leads to stress. Because this is the truth. When Caitlin Clark is in charge of the offense, she performs at her peak. When Kelsey Mitchell is attacking freely, she performs at her best. Additionally, the system needs to figure out how to make both of those things function simultaneously. And it's not simple. Actually, most teams have trouble in that area. Striking a balance between control, roles, and star power. And someone feels constrained when that balance isn't ideal. We don't know if Caitlin feels that way just yet, but we do know that she is conscious of her worth. Everything is altered in that consciousness. Because this athlete isn't merely attempting to blend in. This player is aware of her strengths and weaknesses as well as the consequences of improper use. And that's why this moment is so crucial. For the first time, it seems as though she is assessing the system rather than merely responding to it. And it becomes a long-term discussion once a player begins assessing their circumstances in that way. Because winning games isn't the only thing that matters these days. It's about whether or not I can flourish in this setting. And when you consider the future, that's a lot greater question. Caitlin Clark's contract won't continue forever because she isn't permanently bound by this circumstance. There will be more possibilities for her. Moments like these are important when they do. The stakes are raised because players recall how they were used, valued, and how their strengths were handled. Because organizations are aware that if the system doesn't fit her game, it will eventually become a decision point. Because of this particular Media Day response has greater significance than it first appears. Because it's not just about today, it's also about identity, direction, and if this team is really being constructed around its star player or if that star needs to adapt to something else. People are currently paying a lot of attention because, depending on how it turns out,